In my almost 30 years working with people, helping them retire, we found that there's about 6 traps that people run into either when they retire or before they retire that we want to make sure that we avoid. We could call these death traps, and these can be pretty nasty, and we're going to be covering probably the best one on down the road at the end. So let's go right into this. Trap number 1. Now this trap is pretty obvious, but it's maybe not so obvious to some of us as far as how easily you can get into this. This first trap is taking on too much debt. And Dave Ramsey has talked about debt a lot and says that debt is the thing that you want to get completely rid of as soon as possible. Now, I'm not Dave Ramsey, and I think that a little debt could be okay, and we're not going to be teetotalers as far as debt is concerned. But how much debt is too much debt? The first thing we want to think about is the debt to income ratio. And the debt to income ratio, if you got about 30% debt compared to your income, you're usually in pretty decent shape. When it gets up to 40%, maybe you might want to look at seeing if you can cut that back over time. If it gets from 40 to 50%, you're kind of in a danger territory. But if you get up over 50% debt to income, then you're in some serious hot water. You may be getting into a position where that debt is going to eat you alive, and you get to a position where it becomes really hard to pay down that debt, and the debt starts to own you rather than you having the debt. And so we want to avoid that. The second thing when we look at having too much debt could be your debt to asset ratio. And when we look at the debt to asset ratio, let's look at a verse here. Proverbs 21:5 says, "The good planning and hard work lead to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty." And taking on too much debt, some people could see kind of as a hasty shortcut. So how much debt is too much debt as far as debt to assets are concerned? If you're in your 20s to 30s, you shouldn't have more than maybe about half of your assets in debt. So if you have, let's say, $200,000 in assets, you can take on maybe $100,000 in debt. Once you get into your 40s, you want to look at having about a quarter of your assets in debt. When you get into your 50s, you may want to maybe have an eighth of your assets in debt. And then when you get into your 60s, you pretty much want to have all this debt paid off because you're heading into retirement. A lot of times people want to have all their debt paid off before they head into retirement. Now, these are just rules of thumb. If you have higher amounts of debt compared to your assets, you can work that off over time. And keep in mind that sometimes these assets, you take on debt to accumulate more income-producing assets, and that can be a good thing. But a lot of times, people take on too much debt to accumulate income-producing assets, and things go awry. We've seen situations in the mid-2000s, 2007 heading into 2008, where people took on too much debt to buy up properties, and the property market went in the tank, and a lot of people lost a lot of money, and they had to go bankrupt because they couldn't pay to keep up with all these properties. We see situations where smart people take on too much debt in the form of leverage. They take on margin, and we saw a situation with long-term capital back in the late 90s, and these are Nobel laureates that had to be bailed out by the government because they're too big to fail, and they took on too much debt and they went under. We saw Archegos Capital go under just here a couple years ago, where they took on too much debt and they went under. So a lot of smart people get into big problems because they take on too much margin and too much leverage. They try to take on this leverage to make more money quicker, and they think that that's going to work well for them. And sometimes it does. It works well. It works really well for a while, and then the market turns against them. And the bad thing is, if they have too much leverage, then what they've accumulated, and they've accumulated this, say, over decades, it can go to zero because it goes down twice as fast. And it can go to zero. It can go down faster than twice as fast. As Charlie Munger says, it doesn't matter how good of a track record you have, a great track record times zero always equals zero. Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." Now, what do we mean by that? We don't want to get into a point where the debt owns us. And one way this sometimes happens is if people take on interest-only loans, And people take on these interest-only loans because the payment isn't as big. So the debt-to-income ratio isn't quite as big that way, but the interest-only loans actually allow somebody to afford, as far as the payment, something a lot bigger as far as a house or something like that, but it doesn't pay down the debt, and we get to a point where this can really work against us over time. We're actually fooling ourselves, and we don't want to fool ourselves into taking on too much. The other thing we want to watch out for is anytime we take on a loan where the rate isn't fixed, where we've got a variable rate and the rate can go up over time. And we've all seen this happen over the last few years where rates are really, really low back in 2021, and by 2023, we're paying 5 or 6% more than we were in 2021. And so suddenly we're paying these high rates. We could afford things in 2021, but we suddenly can't afford things just as easily in 2023. So we really want to watch out for that. And that's when the debt can start to consume us. We don't want to have that. Now, we want to consider what's good debt versus bad debt. So when we think about good debt versus bad debt, any debt that we own where we pay super high rates of interest is bad debt. So these credit cards are the worst. You're paying 26, 27, 29% on these credit cards, and you take on too much of that, it becomes really, really hard to pay down. And if you take on a credit card, you're not able to pay it off every month, you probably shouldn't have money on the credit card unless it's a super, super low rate. And even then, you probably shouldn't have anything on the credit card because it's not very good debt. Usually you're taking on the credit cards to pay for things that don't earn you anything. You're using them to pay for food and pay for clothes and things of that nature. Sometimes you can get some travel rewards, sometimes you can get some cash back, but a lot of times this is just a trap to get you to spend on these credit cards. Anytime we're going into debt to pay for things that don't put money in our pocket, that we can consider bad debt. So if we're buying a car, that doesn't usually put money in our pocket unless we're using the car to drive Uber rides all over the place. Now, some of these things are necessities. You have to have a place to live. You have to have something to be able to get you around. These are necessities. So we can take on debt for those. But if we have a second home or a second car or a third car or a seventh car or a 14th car, those are not things that put money in our pocket unless we're charging admission to go see the cars or we're renting them out as part of a fleet or what have you. And so when we take on debt to buy these things, that doesn't do us much good. Sometimes we get into a position where we don't have good credit, we have subprime loans, those usually have super high rates, those are not good. Now we could also say that taking out a student loan, that'll eventually put money in our pocket, but we gotta make sure that we take out a student loan to get a degree where that'll actually allow us to earn income down the road. So if we get a degree in basket weaving or what have you, that may not lead us to be getting a job that'll pay us well in the future. We also want to look at things like business loans. Of course, business loans can be good, or if you get into a bad business, that's not so good, but usually we're looking to get into a good business to earn more money than the loan we're taking on. We take out a personal loan. Those personal loans can be good if we're using it for something that puts money in our pocket. And of course, a home loan or a home equity line of credit, we can use that to afford a home to be able to live in that may be able to appreciate in value more so than just having an apartment or what have you. So having a home loan or a home equity line, those things can be good. We get a tax deduction on that. Actually, it looks like we may get a tax deduction from car loans, which I'm not a huge fan of because I think it may encourage frivolous spending, but that's another story. But we want to be looking at taking on loans. Good loans and good debt are for things that will actually pay us and put more money in our pocket when we buy income-producing assets. Proverbs 6:1-5 says, if you have to put up security for a friend's debt, save yourself like a gazelle escaping from a hunter or like a bird fleeing from the net. So if you have to put up security for somebody, it's usually better to find a way to escape from having to put up security for somebody. Co-signing on a loan can surely lose you a friend. Sometimes even with children, it's not a good sign. And typically we recommend not co-signing for children. We want to be aware and be concerned about economic outpatient care. And what we mean by economic outpatient care, that is caring for an adult child and providing money for an adult child even after they're grown and they get into trouble and they need money, and you keep providing them money over and over and over again even after they've grown, rather than letting them figure out how to deal with it themselves. And the thing about it is, a son or a daughter, they're younger, they can learn to earn, and hopefully they have learned to earn. If they need a little bit, sometimes you can loan it to them, they can pay it back. But if it becomes a habit that they're needing money over and over again, sometimes it may be better to let them learn these lessons on their own and learn how to earn and learn how to be responsible, because you're not going to be here forever. And at some point when you're not around, and if they're not responsible, they're going to get themselves in a lot of hot water. The other thing that we want to keep in mind is that they can borrow to go to school, they can get student loans, they can borrow to buy a house, they can borrow to go into business, but guess what you can't do? When you're retired, they're not going to loan you money for retirement. So if you have loaned out all your money and you've given all this money to your kids and you don't have much left, no one's there to take care of you except for Social Security, and that isn't a whole lot. The other trap that a lot of people fall into is they don't take advantage of the time that they have. They don't value their time. And so a lot of times people get to a position where they're really, really healthy and they're working while they're healthy, and they don't take time to recharge their batteries. They don't take time to enjoy the fruits of their labor while they can. And then they get to the point where they're much older and they wait until they're older when they retire, and they get to a position when they may be in bad health and they can't enjoy retirement the way they thought they'd be able to enjoy retirement when they were younger. We want to make sure that we save up and we're able to retire earlier and be able to enjoy life and enjoy the healthy years of our retirement. You also want to take the time to enjoy your loved ones, enjoy those relationships, because money is one thing, but money can't buy you good relationships. And the relationships are that much more important than just the toys and the things and what have you. We want to learn to put aside the trap that we fall into, is that people harbor a lot of anger toward people that holds them back and destroys relationships. They harbor a lot of bitterness that can destroy relationships. And they harbor a lot of unforgiveness that can destroy relationships. And we don't want to fall into that trap of having too much anger, bitterness, or unforgiveness. And it just hurts ourselves. It doesn't hurt the other person. The unforgiveness is the thing that they don't even know that you haven't forgiven them. They don't even know that you harbor this bitterness toward them. They may know that you're angry occasionally, but this thing eats you up. So why not learn to let go of that? Turn to God to help you let go of that. There's one scripture that I want to mention here, and this scripture is to owe no one anything except to love one another. We don't want to owe them anything. We just want to love them. And that's from Romans 13:8. So the last thing we want to mention is the biggest debt of them all. And that debt is the debt that we owe to God for not living up to His standard. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. None of us are perfect. And some people may think that they're perfect, but they're not. And none of us can live up to His standard, live up to His glory. We're not worthy to be in His presence even. And so we owe a debt to God, and there's one person that has chosen to pay that debt, and that's Jesus Christ, and He has saved us from this debt. And all we have to do is accept His gift and allow Him to pay our debt for us. And if you're smart, you'll say, okay, well, go ahead and pay my debt. It'll be a whole lot better for me spiritually and my economic spirituality down the road, and we'll be better off, and I'll be able to live with Him forever in eternity. And so all you have to do is accept Jesus Christ to pay that debt, and all will be forgiven. The last scripture I want to leave you with is Deuteronomy 28, verses 12 and 13. You will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. The Lord will make you the head, not the tail. If you pay attention to the commands of the Lord your God that I give you this day and carefully follow them, you will always be at the top, never at the bottom. So we shared a lot of scripture today. We shared some pitfalls, some death traps that we fall into and how to get out of these death traps. And hopefully we take these to heart. Since you love this video so much, please feel free to put your thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell so you can be advised when these new videos come out, and share with your friends. As always, stay thirsty for knowledge. We'll catch up with you next time.